morning. Before I delve into the reasons that I called this news conference this morning, I want to speak about a couple other matters, and then we'll get to what I originally had in mind today. Early this morning, an LAPD officer was shot in South Los Angeles, allegedly by a 14-year-old boy without any provocation. To the best of my knowledge, thankfully, the officer is going to be okay. But this incident highlights the gun violence that continues to rack neighborhoods here in Los Angeles. You know, gun violence has increased by 70% since the beginning of this year. And most of it has been focused in South Los Angeles. Today, it was a police officer who was shot by allegedly by a teenager. But in South Los Angeles in particular, there have been little kids who themselves have been gunned down with very little notice around the city. I've been to locations, Nickerson Gardens is a good example, where shootings have occurred again and again. And it just is imperative that all of us in Los Angeles recognize the crisis that this is. I've been grappling with how we can each add value here and try to make life safer for our residents when it comes to this issue. I've had talks with Chief Moore, with gang interventionists, with members of the clergy, with residents, with activists. What can we do as a community about this issue? We can begin by saying that there are too many guns on the street, and we know that. My office, for example, has brought a lawsuit against the major distributor and manufacturer of ghost guns that'll end up on the streets of the city of Los Angeles. Those are guns that aren't easily traceable, for which no background check has been performed, quickly becoming the gun of choice for criminals. It's an issue here. It's an issue around the country. We're trying to add value and stop the flow of those ghost guns onto our streets. But there's so much more we can do and need to do. The pandemic, of course, has exacerbated this problem tremendously. In the teeth of the pandemic, the tools we normally use to combat gun violence were off the table. You know, there was very little person-to-person interaction. Kids weren't in school. Jobs were shut down, so people were on the street with little to do. Guns kept flowing. Gang intervention activities couldn't occur. Intervention at hospitals when someone is shot to avoid retaliation couldn't happen. But we're emerging from that. I'm going to be a key speaker at a public event, a town hall, on October 27th to discuss these issues. And I urge members of the public who are watching this to weigh in with how they think the city, with all the tools we have, from Rick and Parks programs to efforts to prevent guns from flowing into the street, what we all can do to change this. An officer was shot today. Little kids have been shot again and again, caught in the crossfire. This has to stop. I want to also speak about another issue before I get into our topic today, and that pertains to issues surrounding Councilmember Ridley Thomas. This is a very sad day for Los Angeles. I've known and worked with Mark for many years, and since he rejoined the City Council, we've worked together on issues of homelessness and other issues. I know Mark and his family. This must be very tough for them. But the residents of the 10th Council District have tremendous needs. And those needs must be paramount. Public trust in the City Council is essential. So it's with a very heavy heart that I call on Mr. Ridley Thomas to step down and give someone else an opportunity to represent the very important needs of 10th District residents. And those residents, again, have needs that are paramount. They deserve that representation, and the council needs to move forward to conduct the people's business now. And I want to talk about the people's business as I discuss the reasons that I originally asked that we get together this morning. Throughout the city of Los Angeles, I hear a common refrain from residents. Why doesn't the city enforce its own rules? Why doesn't the city enforce its own rules regarding land use issues? Why doesn't it enforce its own rules regarding short-term rentals? All kinds of issues. Enforce your rules. And today I'm announcing the filing of criminal charges focused on enforcing the city's rules. My office has filed 35 criminal charges against developers for alleged numerous building and safety violations. These charges stem from alleged continuing construction on 5 single-family homes. They're 3 stories. They're roughly 5,000 square feet each in the Santa Monica Mountains, in Laurel Canyon in particular. These are the locations of those houses. Those 5 hilltop homes are adjacent to the Mulholland Drive overlook. They originally were built in the 1990s as part of a planned 21-home development, but they were subsequently ordered torn down by city officials in 2003. That order followed a court decision that said that there had to be an environmental impact report performed with regard to that planned development, but that report was never conducted. The structures were never removed. And in the past year, neighbors reported an alleged resurgence of construction activity at those locations. City officials now have ordered that the developers must comply with the order that's already in effect to demolish those 5 structures, clean up the properties. But we allege that they failed to take those steps. And I want to be very clear. Developers must follow the city's rules just like everybody else. These unpermitted structures in the Santa Monica Mountains were supposed to be demolished 20 years ago, and yet we allege the current developers have been ignoring the city's order. We allege they're continuing to work on those structures. Those structures should no longer be there. The rules need to mean something, and we're taking action today to be sure that they do. Let me give you a little more detailed background. So back in the 90s, between 1998 and 1999, permits were issued for the 5 Laurel Canyon homes that I'm referring to. Again, they were to be part of a 21 building development. But in 2002, the California Court of Appeal ruled that the LA Planning Commission, which had later decided that there needed to be an environmental impact report, that decision would be upheld. And the decision was to place a 6-month moratorium on further construction back in those days and to have an environmental impact report conducted. That report, as I mentioned, was never conducted. And a year later, the city ordered that those 5 homes be demolished and the property cleaned up. The city recorded that order with the County of Los Angeles, so it would notify subsequent purchasers that there is this requirement on this property. If you buy this, you know that there's an order that says you have to demolish these properties and clean them up. In the years since, there have been subsequent purchasers of these properties, but for whatever reason, those purchasers were never able or willing to perform what that order required. Then late last year, neighbors reported, as I mentioned earlier, that there appeared to be ongoing construction, they alleged, at those locations, and that alerted the Department of Building and Safety. And inspections followed. Multiple inspections followed. And the city learned that the current owners were intent on constructing more further and finishing these houses. So the city issued new orders to stop the work and comply with the existing order. That's how we come to this. My office is pursuing criminal charges against the developers for allegedly failing to obtain permits before resuming construction, failing to obey the city's subsequent orders to comply, and failing to remove the vacant, unfinished structures. My office is going to seek to have these developers stop all construction and comply with all the laws and standing orders relating to the safe removal of these houses. And obviously, we don't want any harm caused to the surrounding hillsides in the process. I want to thank members of our team who've been working very diligently on this complicated and important case. Deputy City Attorneys Dennis Kong and Richard Kim. I also want, as always, to thank our team members at LA City View Channel 35 for allowing us to communicate to the public. I'd like to say a few words in Spanish, and then I'm happy to take any questions. Hoy anuncio que mi oficina ha presentado 35 cargos criminales contra constructores por numerosas violaciones de seguridad debido a la construcción continua de 5 casas unifamiliares parcialmente construidas de 3 pisos y de 5,000 pies cuadrados en Laurel Canyon. En 2003, estas 5 casas, ubicadas en la cima de una colina, fueron ordenadas por el tribunal ser demolidas. Sin embargo, las estructuras nunca fueron removidas. Y en el último año, los vecinos reportaron en un resurgimiento de la supuesta construcción en las casas. Los constructores deben seguir las reglas de la ciudad, al igual que todos los demás. Mi oficina está tomando medidas al presentar estos cargos penales para garantizar que se cumplan nuestras leyes de construcción y seguridad. Happy to take any questions. Rob, any questions? Oh, Pete has a question.
Good question.
Good morning, Pete.
Good morning. It's the obvious question. How does something like this slip through the cracks for 18 years?
Yeah.
A demolition order was given. Doesn't the city have any protocols that when they give an order, they revisit it in 60 days, 90 days, and say, what's happening?
Yeah, that's a concern of mine, too. Because over the years, there obviously was a standing order from the Department of Building Safety going back to 2003. Multiple people purchased the property and then didn't follow those orders. And we've been following up to try to determine why those orders hadn't been followed previously. I don't have an answer for why that hadn't occurred. What I know now is that when this issue was brought to our attention through the Building and Safety now, we're moving forward to file these charges. And importantly, as I mentioned, in the course of a criminal case, we're going to seek an order that directs that the demolition take place.
Well, that's interesting in that regard, but it also begs the question here, what actually happened during that 18 years? This isn't something like, well, they've got an order, they've got to follow it, I've got other work to do. Was somebody incentivized to forget, to not do a check? Who was in charge of building and safety at that time, and who was the council person that should have known these structures are supposed to be demolished and they didn't follow through?
Yeah, as I say, Building and Safety has had the reins on this. I can't answer those questions directly because I can't go back in time to when the order was issued and subsequent purchasers. I think it's a legitimate concern.
Is it your intention to go back and check those records to find out who signed off on it?
Well, there's no, for what it's worth, as far as I know, and I'm still looking into all this, but as far as I know, there were no sign-offs on anything subsequent to 2003. In other words, in 2003, the order was affirmed that there should be an EIR done, and in the absence of that, there needed to be demolition of these properties. It was recorded with the county so that any subsequent purchaser, and there have been a few purchasers in between now and then, was on notice about this. That's what I know. I don't believe that there were, as far as I know, there have been no actions within Building and Safety since that time. No, because no permit could have been obtained because it would have been unlawful to obtain a permit until the prior order was complied with, so there was nothing for anybody to sign off on. I know this is why, Pete, this is why we're here, because I'm trying to...
Why you're here, but there also begs the question, not only who didn't follow up on this, but was this done with the complicity or the sort of, if you will, out of sight, out of mind with the local council office?
No, there've been, for what it's worth, I do know that the current council office has been very concerned about this issue and has been asking our office what is transpiring with this. So but I can't speak to prior council offices. I just don't know.
Will there be an effort to go in to find out who in the prior council office dropped the ball on this thing or was incentivized to conveniently forget about these things?
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't think it's going to be possible to do that. But what I know, well, again, in my role.
I mean, you've got, not only that, if you want to look at it, who was the council member whose district that was back then?
Well, so for what it's worth, when the original houses were, when the permits were sought for the original houses, and there was, as I mentioned, the Planning Commission intervened, the council member was Councilmember Ferraro, and Councilmember Ferraro's staff was quoted in the Court of Appeal decision that affirmed you have to get an EIR, was quoted discussing these issues, and obviously was very concerned about that. So that I know because there's a record from the Court of Appeal about that. And then the order was issued. I guess, Pete, the bottom line is we're still investigating what we know about what transpired before, but I do know that at this moment, these defendants should have been on notice of the requirement that the houses be demolished and the property cleaned up. They haven't taken that action, we allege, and as a consequence, we filed these charges and intend to pursue the order getting complied with now.
By pursuing it, are you literally going to say, we want to see these 5 homes removed, here's the deadline, meet it or whatever?
Well, we're going to go to court to seek an order to demolish, and again, to be clear, to remove the houses down to the foundation. That was what the order is, rather than disrupt the foundation and the underlying slope that's there. We're going to be seeking an order from the court to do that. I don't want to opine much more about that because that's pending before the court. We haven't gone to the court to make that assertion yet because arraignment hasn't occurred yet.
Do you intend to be highly aggressive about it? If
Yes.
they say we need, if someone says, well, we need more time, you have to look at them and say, you've had 18 years.
Well, it's been multiple. These owners are relatively recent owners of the property, following a series of other owners before then. But Pete, obviously, we intend to be aggressive about this. We have been, now that we were apprised of this issue, we're filing criminal charges. That's a very serious step to take in a building and safety matter.
What about those people who actually built those homes? Are those the ones that are actually being filed on criminally?
No. Mm-mm. No, there've been those owners have been succeeded by a series of subsequent purchasers. Yeah, the developers back in those days are not the owners of the property now. They don't control the property now, as far as we know. Okay, good questions. Thank you.
Yeah, as part of the reason these homes haven't been torn down yet, I'm reading right here. It says under the standing order, the homes were to remain secured until removal and no further construction was allowed. Is that saying that essentially the homes were ordered to just be untouched, nobody could occupy them until somebody could tear them down? Is that a reason it might have taken this long?
Well, we can explore that further with building and safety. The bottom line, as far as we can tell, is there's a standing order. Remove these properties. Certainly, no further construction could be allowed to happen on these properties. You need permits to engage in that. You couldn't get permits to engage in that because until the environmental impact report that never happened was performed, permits were never going to be allowed to be issued. It's our position that the current owners have the obligation to comply with the order to remove these houses to their foundations and to clean up the property. And we're going to take that position in court. And we filed these charges because we allege the continuing construction violates what the orders require. Thank you for the questions. Rob, other questions?
No, we have no further questions.
All right. Thank you all very much. Yeah. Oh, sure.
Are these properties actually unsafe as far as we know, from a structural or other standpoint?
Wait, that's building and safety. They are not considered unsafe from a structural standpoint now. So from what building and safety reports. Thank you, Pete. Thanks, everybody.